Hello, students. How are you? This is our first week in our introduction to the Christian Scriptures. I'm so excited to share this course with you and to teach this book. We're going to be using this book by Arterbury, Bellinger, and Dodson. Engaging the Christian Scriptures. I have here the second edition, and I'm already going through it and doing a lot of highlighting and marking in it, so that's what I like to do with my books. There's also a Kindle version that you can use, so whichever one you prefer, I hope you get one of the books. And I am going to be offering quizzes, multiple choice questions on the readings. However, if you listen or watch these YouTube videos, the chances are that all the answers to the questions will be in the video as well as in the reading. I'm also thinking about posting the PowerPoints in the Canvas site so that you have three different ways that you can pass the quizzes. You can read the PowerPoints, you can watch the videos, and you can read the chapter. I encourage you to do all three. That's the through multiple avenues, that's the best way to learn. So let's jump right into week one. Why read the Bible? And so this is week one, Introduction to the Christian Scriptures, taken from Arterbury, Bellinger, and Dodson, published, the second edition published in 2021. And we have an outline of where we're going today. Why read the Bible? How do we get the Bible? In other words, where does the Bible come from? How is it developed? How shall we read the Bible? This goes to the question of interpretation. And what are questions that we should ask of the Bible? I've really enjoyed this chapter myself. I've been reading the Bible all of my life, but this chapter gave me some very helpful information about how to read the Bible intelligently and with a critical analysis. Okay, so let's jump right in. This is a picture of the Torah, which is in the form of scrolls that can be unrolled and read, probably in Hebrew. So, why read the Bible? Why should we include the study of the Bible as part of an academic curriculum? As you know, this course is coming out of our religious studies department at Florida International University. We have courses on Hinduism, Eastern religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. So our religious studies department approaches the academic study of all religions from a number of different disciplines, academic disciplines. My own particular disciplinary background is history. I have a PhD in history in Latin American and Caribbean studies that I earned here at Florida International University. So I tend to approach the study of Christianity from a historical point of view. And I'm particularly interested in Latin American and Caribbean Christianity. So I also teach a course at FIU on religion in Latin America, Christianity in the Caribbean. I've got another course under development about Christianity in Brazil and another one on Pentecostalism. So if you decide you want to take further courses with our religious studies department on Christianity, hopefully I'll have you again in another class. So why read the Bible? Why study the Bible if you are not necessarily a Jewish or a Christian? Of what relevance would the Bible be to you? First of all, here are some basic reasons. First of all, the Bible offers a window into the ancient world. If you're interested in Assyrian or Babylonian or Egyptian empires, the Greek Hellenistic Empire, the Roman Empire, reading the Bible is like a primary text to giving you a window into the empires of those days. Secondly, the Bible has significantly influenced Western civilization, perhaps more than any other source. Greek and Hebrew culture, but also the Judeo-Christian tradition as expressed in the Old and New Testaments of the Bible have been immensely significant in the development of Western civilization, for good and perhaps also for evil. We have to be honest that there's both good and bad. Nevertheless, if you want to understand Western culture, you must understand the Bible. If you wanted to become an expert on China, I would suggest you study Confucianism. So that's the second reason for studying the Bible, is to understand Western civilization better. The third is that the Bible continues to be viewed as authoritative by a majority of the world's population. Even if religion seems to be declining in Western Europe, perhaps even to some extent in the United States, it's exploding in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and so the Bible is becoming an authoritative source of scripture for a majority of the world's population. So those are some good reasons to read the Bible. Finally, the last reason is the academic study of the Bible is not at odds with a more devotional reading of the Bible that are practiced either privately or communally. Giving attention to the Bible's historical and literary context can contribute to the meaning of the text, though it certainly does not exhaust its meaning. So whether you're a secular person or you're a believer, either way, that you can find great benefit in reading this ancient text and source of wisdom. Better informed readers will try to use this textbook to give beginning students, beginning students the tools and information to become better informed readers of the Bible. We want the reader not only to know the contents of the Bible, but also to gain a critical appreciation and respect for the historical distance between us and modern readers and the ancient contexts of the Bible. When we use the word critical in academic studies, we don't mean to be a nagging or critical person attacking or criticizing others. What we mean is to think critically, to analyze, to evaluate, and this can deepen your understanding of the text. So we want to produce critical thinking and critical analysis of the Bible that can deepen your appreciation for it. We want the reader to consider how these texts were heard and read by their original ancient audiences. So how did we get the Bible? Where did it come from? For centuries, perhaps even from its earliest origins, the Bible has circulated in multiple forms. Anyone who's attempted to purchase a Bible has been likely overwhelmed by the diversity of choices. Lots of different kinds of Bibles to choose from. We can speak not only of diverse translations, but also diverse forms of the Bible. There are Jewish Bibles, Roman Catholic Bibles, Protestant Bibles, Eastern Orthodox Bibles, including the Greek Orthodox Bible and the Russian Orthodox Bible. And some of the Bibles may have significant differences in structure and material that is included. And this brings us to a couple concepts that we need to define. Canon and Scripture. And I'm going to pull this up here. So Scripture refers to those writings that function authoritatively for the faith and practice of a religious group. For the canon, for our purposes, canon refers to a normative list of the authoritative texts that functions as Scripture. The term canon comes from a Greek word, canon with a K, which originally referred to a reed or a rod used for measuring and keeping straight. Eventually, canon began denoting what is normative or standard. in a metaphorical sense. I have a friend who is a fellow Star Trek aficionado, and we were watching Star Trek Discovery a couple of nights ago, and he was commenting on the connections in this newest series of Star Trek with what he called the Star Trek canon. This is not just a religious term. A Star Trek canon is all the information that has gone on before in the timeline of Star Trek series, and who said what and who did what and who went where. That's the Star Trek canon. And so the goal is, with a new series, is to not break the canon, not to violate the canon, but to keep within the Star Trek universe or the Star Trek worldview. So that's what canon can be used in secular ways as well. Canon, for our purposes, refers to the normative list of authoritative texts that functions as scripture. The term canon comes from a Greek word. Oh, I already said that. So, for example, the book of Revelation is canon for Protestants and Catholics, but it's not canon for Greek Orthodox. It's not included in the Greek Orthodox Bible, and there are historical reasons for that. So, an example comes from the New Testament. The Apostle Paul wrote letters to individual churches beginning around 50 AD, or as people prefer to say now, CE, in the Common Era. So around 50 CE, the Common Era, through the 60s, he was writing letters to churches, people that he knew personally that were having real life problems. And by the end of the first century, however, that is within 30 or 40 years after those letters had been written, they began circulating a small collections of letters among many churches. These collections of letters became authoritative for matters of Christian faith and practice among those churches. As a result, early Christians deemed these Pauline letter collections to be scripture. For example, the writer of 2 Peter recognizes Paul's letters as having the same authority as the Jewish scriptures early in the 2nd century. That's 2 Peter 3:15 through 16. The Christian Old Testament is in essence identical to the Hebrew Bible, because Christianity began as a Jewish movement, a Jewish reform movement. The Jewish and Christian canons are actually a collection of collections of canon. The Hebrew Bible is arranged into 3 parts: the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, and we'll be getting into that next week. Accordingly, the Hebrew canon of Scripture is often referred to as the Tanakh. I'll pull this up here so you can see the spelling of Tanakh, which is an acronym based on the Hebrew titles for the 3 parts of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible: the Torah, the Nevi'im, and the Ketuvim. The Tanakh is the whole. I lost my place. Hang on. Okay, so the primary difference between the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Old Testament is the arrangement of the books, in particular the arrangement of the prophets. Whereas all of the prophets constitute the second division of the Hebrew Bible as an entire section called the prophets, the Christian canon separates the former prophets, like Joshua through 2 Kings, from the latter prophets, Isaiah through Malachi. It places the latter prophets at the conclusion of the Old Testament and groups the former prophets with other biblical books that resemble historical narratives, thus creating a historical books category that the Hebrew Bible did not have. There's also 2 different Christian Old Testaments. I know this gets complex, doesn't it? When talking about the Christian Old Testament, though, we need to distinguish between the Catholic Old Testament and the Protestant Old Testament. The Catholic Old Testament contains additional writings not found in the Protestant Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. These differences derive from the Septuagint, the Greek translations of the Hebrew Scriptures. The Apocrypha can also be called deuterocanonical. That's a hard word to say. Deuterocanonical. The Septuagint served as the primary form of Scripture for many Jewish communities in the first centuries BCE and CE. The Septuagint had additional writings, and it became the common version of the Jewish scriptures used by the early Christians. The Catholic Old Testament follows the early Christian traditions and the structure of the Septuagint as its Old Testament canon, both in its arrangement and its content. The Protestant tradition, on the other hand, separates the additional writings from the traditional Christian Old Testament and puts them in an appendix which it calls the Apocrypha. The Catholic tradition refers to these writings as deuterocanonical, the second canon, indicating their continued authoritative status. So these are some books that most Protestants don't read, but are included in the Catholic Old Testament. In the New Testament canon, we have three collections. The first collection are the Pauline letters that we've already mentioned earlier. Our early evidence of this collection was a 10-letter collection that included 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Romans, Ephesians 1 through 2, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, Galatians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. The second collection were the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The third collection are called the Catholic letters or the universal letters. They're Catholic, not in the sense of the Roman Catholic Church, but in the sense of being universal letters rather than Pauline letters. And this included James, 1st and 2nd Peter, 1st, 2nd and 3rd John, and Jude are the universal letters or the Catholic letters. What is the criteria for canonicity? The earliest canon lists most likely emerged in the 3rd century of the Common Era, in other words, sometime after 200 AD. These canon lists derive from the different regions and represent various attempts to identify which Christian writings were authoritative. Early Christians also placed great value on writings that were universally relevant and adaptable to all Christian churches in all places and in all times. In general, Christians affirmed the authority of the New Testament because of its apostolicity. I have a real problem with pronunciation, and this is my native language. You should hear me in Spanish. Apostolicity, universality, and traditional use. Traditional esteem and value. There's different textual traditions of the Bible as well. Modern Bibles are based on the study and comparison of thousands of ancient manuscripts. The original text of the Bible, referred to as autographs, have long since disappeared. The manuscripts that are in existence are copies of copies exponentially. Textual criticism is an academic discipline where scholars study the manuscript traditions of the Bible, and they engage in this discipline called textual criticism. The traditional purpose of textual criticism is to reconstruct the earliest form of the text, ideally in its original form, by analyzing and comparing the contrasting manuscripts. Discrepancies among the manuscripts are called variant readings. The differences among the copies of the same literary work come about because of unintentional errors on the part of the scribes while copying, as well as occasionally possible intentional editorial changes. Some of the guiding principles for textual criticism and translations. Modern translations represent a close approximation of the earliest forms of the biblical text. First, scholars identify the shortest reading as the earliest version of the text because scribes had a tendency to conflate the different readings into one harmonized passage, which usually resulted in a longer reading. So that's the first guiding principle, is look for the shortest reading. The second is that the more difficult reading is likely the earliest version, because scribes frequently smoothed out problematic readings, both grammatical and theological difficulties. So which text was the shortest? Which one is the most difficult? And finally, the reading that best explains how other variant readings originated is to be preferred. So you can see that the textual scholars can the word I was going to use, I just forgot what it was, but they can navigate and use a number of different approaches in order to evaluate the authenticity and origins of a text. Triangulate, that's what I was going to say. They could triangulate. So, translations of the Bible. We're on page 14 of the Arterbury text. The original language of the Old Testament was Hebrew, with some portions in Aramaic. The original language of the New Testament was Greek. In the late 4th century, the Christian theologian Jerome began translating the Old Testament and the New Testament into Latin. Martin Luther was one of the first Protestant translators who translated the Bible into German in 1522. John Wycliffe translated the Latin Vulgate into English in manuscript form in 1384, much earlier. Notice that he translated from Latin to Greek. He didn't translate, from Latin into English. He didn't translate his text from Hebrew and Greek. So that would be a mark against his particular translation, because it's a translation of a translation. William Tyndale had the printing press available to him, and he printed the first English Bible by 1530, at least part of the Bible. He never finished the entire translation because he was burned at the stake for his translating activities. The authorities that were did not really want the Bible in the common languages in the hands of the common people. They were afraid they might come up with different doctrines. Whatever gave them that idea. Then another very famous translation was issued in 1611 in English, the King James Version. And it's one of the first translations that had a committee that worked together to do the translating. There's some value in committee translations because there's a check and balance aspect. An allegory. So some of the interpreters understood the text to have hidden meanings, and thus great symbolic value for readers. This was especially true in the medieval period. A lot of medieval scholars would look for allegories within the text. I think even as far back as Origen, who interpreted the scriptures allegorically. For example, an example of allegory would be the character Aslan in C.S. Lewis's book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, in the Chronicles of Narnia. As the lion, Aslan, functions as an allegory, an allegorical symbol of Christ. Another example that is more historical would be that of Jonah and the great fish. Many medieval interpreters read this narrative as an allegory of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. That is, they read Jonah 3 days in the belly of the fish and then being brought back up to finish his mission as an allegory of Christ. Hermeneutics. Two questions were at the heart of the interpretive task. What did the Bible mean? That is, what did it mean for people in the first century, or even going further back to the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries when it was in the before Christ, when it was the Torah was being developed in ancient Palestine, ancient Israel. What did the Bible mean? Oops, I'm going the wrong way now. What did the Bible mean, and what does the Bible mean? So how do I understand how they understood it when it was written and they first read it? But then how do I take that to a current contemporary understanding for how I should live, the norms and morals that should guide my life today? That's the tricky part of biblical interpretation. These questions suggest a hermeneutic focusing on historical matters related to the origin of the text. This process of interpretation has come to be known as hermeneutics, the art of interpretation. So hermeneutics is the art of interpretation. Right there. Questions of origin. So the chapter closes with some suggestions for some good questions we can ask to gain greater understanding of the text. I have a friend who is great in a discussion because he's a good listener, and he's a great question asker. He comes up with the best questions. And so sometimes the way to gain greater understanding is to ask good questions. And so the book or the text suggests 3 questions. Questions of origin. The Bible originated in the ancient Near East and the ancient Mediterranean world. One must understand that world in which the text originated. I have another friend who is a bit of an expert on the ancient Mediterranean world, and he studied it exhaustively, and it deepens and enriches his reading of the text. Archaeology is one of the essential tools that helps interpreters because archaeology goes about trying to clarify information about the people who both wrote the text and received the text. The goal of archaeology is not to prove or disapprove the Bible. It's to clarify facts about the original peoples. Questions of literature. Faithful readers must pay attention to literary forms. There's a difference between genealogies and the poetry of the Psalms. A lot of the Old Testament is actually poetry, and so to understand these different literary forms is vitally important in interpreting the text. Questions of reception. How would readers, ancient and contemporary, receive these texts? This is a more postmodern approach to hermeneutics. What does it mean to the reader? What was the cultural context in which the ancient readers, hearers would have encountered these texts? What do readers today bring to the text? How does that have an impact on interpretation? I could give some pretty good examples of this, like the whole story of the Exodus and the Exodus into the wilderness, 30 years in the wilderness, and what that meant to New England Puritans who were fleeing England and trying to become a city set on a hill, a city set on a hill and a light to the nations. And they interpreted the Exodus story in terms of their experience in New England, and then enslaved Africans working in the South, in the cotton fields, also coming to understand and wrestling with the Exodus story and the story of Moses and liberation from slavery. The text had a very different meaning for them as they encountered the text and interpreted it in their situation. So this is an example of the questions of reception. And that's all we have time for today. I thank you for watching this. Most of the answers to the questions in the quiz were in this video. I will also post the PowerPoint and the Canvas for you. And of course, most of all, read chapter 1, Why Read the Bible. And let me know if you have any questions. Thank you very much.